It started like any other flight. The hum of the engines, the gentle chatter of passengers, the soft clatter of flight attendants moving down the aisle. Everything seemed ordinary, almost mundane. The first-class cabin, with its spacious seats and understated luxury, was supposed to be a haven for those who had earned it, a sanctuary where comfort and prestige merged into a quiet sense of accomplishment. For the CEO, it was exactly that, a reward, a symbol of years of tireless effort, late nights, and countless sacrifices. This was not just a seat, it was a recognition of achievement, a small but significant acknowledgement that success had its perks. He had boarded the plane with confidence, his briefcase in one hand, a sleek leather travel bag in the other, and a mind preoccupied with upcoming meetings and business strategies. The cabin crew greeted him with polite smiles, familiar with the ritual of ushering first-class passengers to their designated seats. He moved down the aisle, feeling the subtle nods of acknowledgement from other travelers, a quiet recognition of status that often went unnoticed but never failed to make a difference. He approached his assigned seat, a premium spot by the window that offered a perfect view of the world below. He adjusted his jacket, set his bag neatly beside him, and reached for the armrest with a sense of satisfaction. But in that fleeting moment of anticipation, everything changed. There was someone already in the seat he had reserved. A passenger, unfamiliar to him and seemingly oblivious to the protocol, had planted themselves in his spot. The white passenger looked up casually, offering a polite but firm smile, as if the situation were entirely ordinary, as if the world had been designed for them to sit there, right where he was meant to be. There was no recognition of the discomfort caused, no awareness of the disruption. The casualness, the sheer audacity, sent a jolt through the CEO. He froze for a second, the brain registering disbelief before the emotions could catch up. Shock, anger, confusion, humiliation. It was more than just a seat. It was a subtle assertion, a message that, in that precise moment, his hard-earned entitlement didn't seem to matter. He was trained to maintain composure, to navigate complex situations with diplomacy and calm, yet a deep, instinctive reaction surged within him, demanding acknowledgement, recognition, and justice. The realization hit him that sometimes the world did not automatically honor merit or achievement. Sometimes it presented challenges in the form of audacity, boldness, and blatant disregard for rules. He cleared his throat gently, hoping the passenger would notice the mistake and move voluntarily. "Excuse me," he began, keeping his voice measured, controlled, professional. The tone was polite but firm, layered with the subtle authority of someone accustomed to command. The white passenger looked up again, eyes bright, smiling as if responding to a greeting rather than an objection. The casual demeanor, the lack of any sense of wrongdoing, intensified the CEO's frustration. It was almost surreal, a collision of expectation and reality. This was supposed to be a private moment of comfort, a space he had earned through years of relentless work, and here it was being intruded upon by someone who had no conception of boundaries or entitlement. The cabin crew, noticing the interaction, approached with practiced caution. They had seen disputes before, minor conflicts over seating arrangements, usually resolved quickly and quietly. But this was different. The tension was palpable, the CEO's presence commanding yet tinged with a rare vulnerability that only those who had been wronged could display. The white passenger, on the other hand, seemed completely unaware of the gravity of the situation, radiating an unintentional arrogance. The cabin crew attempted to mediate, politely explaining that the seat was assigned to another passenger, offering alternative solutions, but the passenger resisted, citing convenience, preference, and seemingly trivial reasons that barely masked the underlying sense of entitlement. In that moment, the first-class cabin became a stage for a silent power struggle. Eyes subtly turned in their direction, fellow passengers sensing the tension, some curious, others silently judging. The CEO, normally composed and calculating, felt the rare sting of personal affront. It was not merely about comfort or luxury. It was about respect, recognition, and acknowledgement of one's place and effort. A first-class seat was a small symbol, yet symbols often carry weight far beyond their material value. Sitting there, he realized that what was at stake was more than just a chair. It was a momentary challenge to his authority, his identity, and his earned space in the world. The white passenger shifted slightly, as if settling more comfortably into a territory that was never theirs, while the CEO, maintaining outward calm, processed the absurdity of the situation. This was not just an accident. It was a collision of perceptions, of societal norms, and of individual expectations. The brief encounter highlighted the delicate balance between civility and assertion, between politeness and rightful claim. It underscored a larger, unspoken tension that existed in subtle interactions, where entitlement clashed with achievement and audacity confronted earned respect. In those few moments, the CEO experienced a storm of conflicting emotions: frustration, indignation, disbelief, and an underlying resolve that would later shape the course of the entire flight. It was a moment charged with anticipation, a spark that hinted at consequences yet to unfold. The first-class cabin, a space meant for serenity, had transformed into a crucible for human behavior, testing patience, composure, and the very notion of justice. The seat itself had become more than a physical object. It was a symbol of challenge, a point of contention, and the catalyst for an unfolding story that would soon shock everyone aboard. The CEO's initial shock quickly gave way to a swirl of emotions that he struggled to contain. Humiliation, anger, disbelief, they all collided in his mind, creating a storm that was difficult to manage yet impossible to ignore. For a man accustomed to control and command, to having situations bend under the weight of his authority, this sudden affront was disorienting. He had spent years honing his professional poise, learning to navigate high-stakes negotiations, boardroom confrontations, and complex business dealings with a level of composure that often seemed effortless to outsiders. Yet here, in the confined space of a first-class cabin, confronted by a stranger who had brazenly taken what was rightfully his, he felt the rare sting of vulnerability. The humiliation was subtle but piercing. It wasn't public in the sense of a loud scene or scandal, yet it carried an almost intimate sharpness. The other passengers, although seated at a respectful distance, had likely noticed the brief exchange. Eyes turned discreetly, some curious, some perhaps judging, some sympathizing silently. The CEO was aware of this, acutely sensitive to perception, and the realization that someone could so casually disregard not just etiquette, but also the acknowledgement of achievement made the experience sting more deeply. It was not simply about a seat. It was a small but tangible symbol of recognition, and its denial felt like a negation of his work, effort, and presence. Anger simmered beneath his calm exterior. Not the explosive, uncontrolled anger that erupts without warning, but a quiet, calculated indignation. This was the type of anger that sharpened focus, made the mind work faster, and allowed one to see options and opportunities that others might overlook. He was angry at the audacity of the passenger, at the casual disrespect for protocol, and at the subtle societal undertones that seemed to suggest that privilege could sometimes override merit. Yet he was also angry at himself, briefly, for letting the situation reach this point before taking action. It was a complex emotion, one that blended frustration with determination, humiliation with the drive for restoration. As he sat in the aisle, next to the occupied seat, the CEO tried to assess the situation objectively. He observed the passenger carefully, the mannerisms, the body language, the subtle cues that revealed more than words ever could. The passenger shifted casually, crossing legs, adjusting belongings, completely at ease as if the situation were perfectly normal. There was no awareness, no apology, no recognition of the subtle power imbalance. This blatant disregard for boundaries, whether conscious or unconscious, intensified the CEO's feelings, highlighting the stark contrast between expectation and reality. In the background, the cabin crew moved carefully, aware of the tension but hesitant to escalate it unnecessarily. They had been trained to manage disputes with discretion, to offer solutions and compromises that could defuse situations without confrontation. Yet this was different. This was no simple miscommunication or accidental oversight. This was an unspoken challenge, a direct affront to order and respect in a microcosm of society that often mirrored broader dynamics. Their polite suggestions, alternate seat offers, and gentle reminders of protocol were met with subtle resistance. the passengers' casual refusals punctuating the CEO's growing sense of indignation. The CEO's mind, however, did not dwell solely on the emotional impact. Even in this moment of personal affront, he began to strategize. Every detail mattered: the layout of the cabin, the reactions of other passengers, the timing of crew interventions, and the psychological state of the person who had taken his seat. He understood that immediate confrontation might not yield the desired effect, that a reaction born purely of anger could undermine his authority and credibility. Instead, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, to observe, to consider the implications of every possible move. This blend of emotional intensity and strategic thinking was characteristic of him, a combination that had fueled his rise to leadership. There was also a subtle awareness of optics, the realization that actions taken in public spaces are rarely private in their impact. Fellow passengers, quietly observing the interaction, might form opinions, judgments, or assumptions. The CEO understood that every choice, every movement, every word carried weight. His reputation, built over decades of professional and personal effort, was not something to be casually compromised. The humiliation of having someone encroach upon his space was amplified by the public nature of the cabin, even in the absence of overt confrontation. It was a social calculus that demanded careful consideration. Beyond the immediate emotional and strategic dimensions, the CEO also felt a surge of determination. Humiliation can be corrosive if left unchecked, but it can also serve as fuel for action. The recognition that he had been wronged, coupled with the capacity to respond thoughtfully, sparked a drive not for retaliation and anger, but for restoration of balance. He was determined to reclaim not only the physical seat, but also the symbolic authority it represented. The sense of injustice was sharp, and the desire to turn the situation around, to assert his rightful place, began to crystallize in his mind. Even as he maintained his composure outwardly, internally he ran through countless scenarios. What would be the most effective way to address the situation? How could he assert authority without causing unnecessary chaos? How could he ensure that the resolution would leave a clear impression, both on the passenger and on the broader audience of the cabin? Each question reinforced his resolve, sharpening his focus and heightening his awareness. He understood that patience and strategy often produced more powerful outcomes than impulsive action, and he committed himself to thinking several steps ahead, anticipating reactions, and leveraging every element of the environment to his advantage. As the minutes passed, the CEO's emotional state evolved. Shock transformed into clarity, humiliation into resolve, and anger into strategic focus. The initial sting of being displaced gave way to a deliberate assessment of power, opportunity, and timing. Every glance, every interaction, and every subtle exchange in the cabin became a part of the mental calculus, a thread in the unfolding narrative of control, respect, and ultimately, the reclaiming of what had been momentarily taken from him. Tension quickly began to build in the cabin, a subtle but palpable undercurrent that could be felt by everyone present, even if they were not directly involved. The first-class area, normally a space of quiet comfort and refined etiquette, seemed to shrink under the weight of the silent standoff between the CEO and the passenger who had taken his seat. Every movement, every glance, every small sound became magnified in the CEO's awareness. The hum of the engines, the soft footsteps of the flight attendants, even the muted rustle of a magazine in the hands of a nearby traveler seemed louder, more deliberate, more significant. It was as if the entire plane had become a stage for an unspoken drama, one in which every observer was unknowingly cast as a witness. The passengers around them began to sense that something unusual was unfolding. People glanced subtly in the direction of the aisle, catching brief glimpses of the exchange. Some shifted in their seats, trying not to be obvious, while others allowed their curiosity to take over, their attention drawn to the tension like moths to a flame. The CEO, fully aware of the watchful eyes, remained outwardly composed, his posture impeccable, his expression neutral yet commanding. There was an almost imperceptible aura of authority radiating from him, a silent declaration that he was not someone to be dismissed or disregarded lightly. The contrast between him and the passenger, who seemed oblivious to the social dynamics at play, heightened the sense of imbalance, creating a quiet but intense energy in the cabin. Even the flight attendants, trained to anticipate and manage every conceivable scenario, felt the tension. They moved with careful precision, their gestures polite and unobtrusive, yet there was a subtle wariness in their actions. They knew that first-class passengers often expected discretion, respect, and swift resolution to any inconvenience. Yet this particular situation was delicate. It was no longer just a matter of seating arrangements. It had become a psychological and social contest, a test of patience, composure, and subtle power dynamics. The CEO's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the passengers' casual defiance, creating a friction that was both visible and tangible. Within this charged atmosphere, the CEO's mind worked tirelessly. He observed, analyzed, and predicted. Every shift in posture, every facial expression, every small action of the passenger was cataloged, mentally noted, and assessed. He was calculating not only the immediate options for reclaiming his seat, but also the potential reactions of everyone else in the cabin. Timing would be crucial. Any abrupt or overt action could escalate the situation unnecessarily, while inaction could be perceived as weakness. He understood that true influence often comes not from force or confrontation, but from patience, observation, and the strategic application of pressure. The passenger, for their part, seemed blissfully unaware of the psychological currents swirling around them. They adjusted belongings, stretched, and casually looked out the window, acting as though the seat had always been theirs. This unintentional arrogance, or perhaps obliviousness, only intensified the CEO's resolve. It was a challenge that could not be ignored, a subtle test of composure and authority. The contrast between entitlement and earned authority created a tension that extended beyond the immediate interaction, touching upon social expectations, personal boundaries, and the unspoken rules that govern shared spaces. As moments passed, the subtle dynamics of the cabin shifted further. Fellow passengers, sensing the CEO's controlled authority and the passengers' disregard, began to form their own quiet judgments. Some felt sympathy, recognizing the injustice of the situation and appreciating the CEO's restraint. Others were intrigued, curious about how this silent confrontation might unfold. There was a collective anticipation, a sense that the ordinary rhythm of the flight had been interrupted by a scenario that demanded attention. The CEO's awareness of this unspoken audience added another layer to his strategy. Every word, every gesture, every small movement could influence perception and outcome. The tension also affected the crew in ways that were less visible but equally significant. Their professionalism required them to maintain calm and offer solutions, yet they were also human, susceptible to the subtle emotional currents in the cabin. They adjusted their approach, carefully modulating their voices, refining their gestures, and positioning themselves to observe without interference. Their presence, while discreet, reinforced the high stakes of the situation. It was a reminder that the CEO was not acting in isolation. The social and procedural environment of the plane was an active participant, shaping the unfolding drama in ways both overt and covert. Within the CEO, the tension had a dual effect. It was both a test and a catalyst. It sharpened focus, honed awareness, and amplified resolve. The mind works differently under pressure, parsing subtle cues, weighing options, and anticipating outcomes with heightened clarity. Every flicker of expression, every shift in posture, every half-smile or glance from the passenger provided data. The CEO absorbed it all, silently constructing the architecture of the response that would eventually turn the situation in his favor. The tension itself became a tool, a resource to be harnessed, a force that could be channeled into precision and strategy rather than impulsive reaction. The standoff continued, minute by minute, the cabin air thick with unspoken expectation. Fellow travelers shifted in their seats, some exchanging quiet looks, others remaining engrossed in their own devices, but nonetheless sensing that something extraordinary was in progress. The CEO maintained composure, letting the tension build deliberately, knowing that patience often yields more dramatic and decisive outcomes than immediate confrontation. This silent pressure, the psychological weight of observation and anticipation, was slowly shaping the environment, influencing perceptions, and setting the stage for the next move in what had become a battle of quiet authority versus casual defiance. Even as the physical proximity of the passenger remained the same, the dynamic between them had shifted. The CEO's controlled presence, his awareness of the cabin as a microcosm of social interaction, and his strategic patience created an invisible tension field, one that the passenger could feel even if they did not consciously recognize it. The stage was set, the psychological landscape prepared, and every element, the passengers, the crew, the confined space of first class, was now aligned in anticipation of the moment when the balance of authority would be decisively reasserted. As the CEO sat observing the situation, a subtle but unmistakable shift occurred within his mind. What had begun as shock and humiliation now evolved into a deliberate and meticulous planning process. The initial emotional turmoil had settled into a sharpened focus, a clarity born from experience, intelligence, and an understanding of human behavior. He recognized that the moment required more than reaction, it demanded strategy. Revenge, he knew, was not about impulsive retaliation. It was about careful, precise, and unforgettable restoration of balance. Every action had to be measured, every move calculated, every possibility considered. He began to analyze the cabin, noting the positions of the flight attendants, the subtle patterns of passenger behavior, and the layout of the seats. He considered timing, the sequence of interactions, and the likely responses of everyone involved. In his mind, the scenario was not simply about reclaiming a seat. It was about asserting authority, establishing respect, and creating a psychological impact that would resonate far beyond the immediate moment. The process was methodical. He did not allow frustration to cloud judgment. Instead, he channeled it into tactical observation and strategic planning. The passenger, completely unaware of the internal calculus taking place beside them, continued to adjust, stretch, and arrange belongings as though the space were entirely theirs. Their obliviousness, though frustrating, served as a key component of the CEO's emerging strategy. He recognized that unpredictability could be an advantage. The passengers' casual disregard for protocol, while irritating, made them vulnerable to a carefully orchestrated response. Every gesture they made was a clue, every habitual movement an opportunity. He began to visualize the perfect sequence, a series of steps that would ensure both the reclaiming of his seat and the demonstration of authority without unnecessary confrontation. He considered the psychological impact not only on the passenger, but also on the surrounding passengers and crew. A well-executed plan would serve multiple purposes. It would restore his personal space, assert boundaries, and establish a subtle but undeniable social message. Audacity and entitlement could not overrule earned respect. The CEO's mind worked like a chessboard, each piece representing a potential action or reaction, each sequence calculated to produce the maximum effect. Timing was crucial. The payoff had to be precise, unambiguous, and visible, yet executed with the finesse of someone who understood the nuances of human perception. As he formulated his approach, he reflected on the subtle social dynamics at play. First-class seating, after all, was a microcosm of hierarchy, privilege, and etiquette. Each passenger carried unspoken expectations about respect, protocol, and behavior. The violation of these expectations by the passenger who had taken his seat created a ripple effect, influencing the mood and attention of everyone nearby. By carefully leveraging this collective awareness, the CEO realized he could amplify the impact of his response. The audience, passive observers until now, would become participants in the narrative of justice, their perception shaping the ultimate outcome. He also weighed the role of the cabin crew in his plan. Their presence was both a limitation and an opportunity. Any overt aggression could provoke intervention, but subtle manipulation and engagement could turn them into allies, ensuring smooth execution. The CEO considered their likely reactions to various approaches, anticipating questions, objections, and possible missteps. He refined his strategy to minimize disruption while maximizing visibility and psychological impact. The interplay of restraint, timing, and subtle influence became the foundation of what he envisioned as a flawless response. Internally, the CEO felt a rising sense of empowerment. The transition from humiliation to control was deliberate, almost intoxicating. The passenger's casual arrogance had inadvertently provided him with the perfect scenario to demonstrate composure, intellect, and authority. The plan was no longer about mere seating. It had become a narrative of justice, a demonstration of strategic dominance that would resonate in the minds of everyone present. Each decision, from verbal engagement to physical positioning, was now part of a larger orchestration, a sequence designed to achieve not only correction but also recognition of his rightful status. He imagined multiple scenarios in which the passenger might respond: resistance, surprise, confusion, or even compliance. All possibilities were accounted for. He visualized himself guiding the interaction, controlling the tempo, and turning the psychological balance decisively in his favor. The anticipation of executing this plan, the meticulous consideration of each step, heightened his focus and confidence. He recognized the power inherent in patience and subtlety, understanding that the most effective form of revenge was not the loudest or most immediate, but the one that left a lasting impression on both the transgressor and the observers. The CEO's attention to detail extended to the smallest elements: the alignment of his belongings, the measured tone of his voice, the timing of gestures, even the placement of his hands on armrests or personal items. Each detail contributed to the overall psychological framework, reinforcing authority, composure, and control. He understood that people perceive confidence and intent not just in words but in posture, presence, and the rhythm of interaction. By maintaining perfect equilibrium, he would convey dominance without confrontation, power without aggression, ensuring that the eventual outcome would be as undeniable as it was satisfying. As he prepared mentally, he also recognized the importance of adaptability. While the plan was precise, human behavior is unpredictable. The CEO allowed flexibility, contingency, and contingency upon contingency, ensuring that no response from the passenger, crew, or fellow travelers could undermine the execution. He remained alert to subtle shifts in energy, tone, and body language, ready to adjust the approach in real time, to exploit opportunities, and to preempt resistance. The tension, rather than a hindrance, became a tool, sharpening perception and enhancing strategic clarity. With every passing moment, the CEO's strategy solidified. The combination of patience, observation, and mental calculation transformed what had started as an affront into an opportunity, a stage for asserting control, demonstrating intellect, and delivering a response that would be both satisfying and unforgettable. Every element, from timing to psychological influence to audience perception, was carefully considered and woven into a plan that promised not only justice, but also a display of undeniable mastery over a challenging situation. The moment had finally arrived. The cabin, previously filled with quiet tension and unspoken anticipation, now seemed to hold its collective breath. The CEO, having meticulously planned his response, was ready to execute his strategy with precision. Every fiber of his being was attuned to the situation, every glance, every movement, calculated to maximize effect. The white passenger, still oblivious to the psychological game unfolding beside them, continued to sit casually, completely unaware of the storm about to break. It was a moment of perfect opportunity, the convergence of preparation, patience, and the unsuspecting nature of the transgressor. The CEO initiated the first step with subtlety. He shifted his body slightly, creating a quiet but deliberate presence that drew attention. The action was understated yet commanding, a silent signal of intent. Fellow passengers, who had been observing with curiosity, began to sense a shift in energy. There was a newfound gravity in the CEO's demeanor, a tension that was both visible and palpable. The flight attendants, already aware of the previous standoff, now registered the CEO's measured actions with renewed attention, understanding instinctively that something significant was about to unfold. Next, he engaged verbally, choosing words with the precision of a strategist. The tone was calm, composed, yet layered with authority. It was not confrontational in the overt sense, but it carried an undeniable weight, the kind that forces attention and respect. The words were carefully constructed to assert entitlement, reclaim space, and subtly challenge the passenger's audacity without provoking unnecessary conflict. Every syllable, every inflection, was designed to convey control, intelligence, and quiet power. The casual arrogance of the passenger began to falter, replaced by a faint recognition that the situation was no longer entirely under their control. Simultaneously, the CEO employed a series of subtle physical cues. A shift in posture, a deliberate gesture toward his belongings, a careful alignment of his personal items, all served to reinforce his presence and authority. The actions were almost imperceptible in isolation, yet together they created a pattern that communicated dominance and intent. The passenger, while still seated, began to register the meticulousness, the deliberate nature of the CEO's behavior. There was a growing awareness that the simple act of occupying a seat had evolved into a contest of strategy, perception, and control. The psychological pressure intensified as the CEO introduced an element of social influence. He allowed the subtle attention of surrounding passengers to become part of the dynamic. Eyes that had been merely curious now shifted into silent witness. The CEO's measured actions, observed by others, amplified the effect on the passenger. Social perception, a powerful yet often unconscious force, became a tool in his hands. The sense of being watched, evaluated, and subtly judged began to weigh on the passenger, eroding the casual confidence they had previously exhibited. It was an invisible, inescapable pressure that added layers of complexity to the unfolding drama. Every small movement, every pause, was part of the orchestration. The CEO adjusted his seat slightly, allowed a brief silence to linger, and observed the micro-reactions of the passenger. Each micro-expression, each shift in eye movement or body language, was noted and incorporated into the evolving plan. The CEO's mental agility was at its peak, combining emotional intelligence with strategic foresight. He understood that true mastery in situations like this comes from patience, observation, and the ability to subtly manipulate dynamics without overt confrontation. At a calculated moment, he escalated the strategy with a precise, assertive action that was both unavoidable and undeniable. The gesture, deliberate yet controlled, forced the passenger to acknowledge the situation. It was not aggressive, it was strategic, designed to assert authority and reclaim his rightful space. The surrounding passengers, now fully aware that a resolution was underway, leaned subtly into their roles as observers. The CEO's actions created a ripple effect, transforming what could have been a private conflict into a shared social experience. With his authority and composure at the center, the passenger, confronted with the undeniable reclaiming of authority, began to exhibit signs of discomfort. The initial confidence, the casual obliviousness, gave way to hesitation, confusion, and eventually, a begrudging recognition of the CEO's control. Every subtle move, every carefully timed verbal cue, and every psychological nudge contributed to dismantling the passenger's sense of entitlement. The balance of power had shifted decisively. The cabin, previously tense with anticipation, now carried a charged energy as observers absorbed the transformation in real time. Even the flight attendants, trained to maintain calm and neutrality, could not ignore the unfolding resolution. Their professional instincts acknowledged the CEO's mastery of the situation, the precision with which he had combined strategy, psychological insight, and social influence. They adjusted their behavior accordingly, ensuring that the environment remained orderly while implicitly supporting the CEO's reclamation of space. The interplay of authority, social perception, and strategic patience created a moment of undeniable impact, one that transcended the simple logistics of a seat assignment. The CEO's satisfaction was not born of malice, but of precision, control, and justice. Every element of his plan had worked in concert, demonstrating the power of careful observation, strategic patience, and psychological insight. The passenger, once oblivious and assertive, now had no choice but to acknowledge the shift. The reclamation of the seat was complete, but it was more than just a physical victory. It was a demonstration of authority, composure, and strategic intelligence, observed by all and felt subtly by everyone involved. Throughout the execution, the CEO remained impeccably composed, a master of presence and influence. His movements, his words, and his attention to detail had created a chain reaction that culminated in undeniable recognition of his rightful place. The moment was a testament to the power of strategic patience, psychological acuity, and the ability to turn humiliation into an opportunity for influence and authority. The passengers' initial audacity had set the stage, but it was the CEO's deliberate, calculated, and precise response that defined the outcome. The cabin remained charged long after the decisive moment had passed. A palpable sense of astonishment lingered in the air as passengers absorbed the scene that had just unfolded. The CEO, having reclaimed his seat with precision and authority, remained composed, almost serene, while the white passenger processed the unexpected turn of events. Subtle shifts in posture, hesitant glances, and the faint tightening of facial expressions revealed a dawning realization. The audacity that had once seemed inconsequential was now met with an unassailable response. The dynamic within the cabin had shifted irrevocably. Fellow travelers, who had quietly observed the unfolding drama, began to exchange subtle expressions of surprise and admiration. The social awareness of the situation spread quietly yet powerfully, influencing perception and conversation even among those who had initially remained disengaged. There was a collective recognition that the scenario had transcended a simple dispute over a seat. It had become a demonstration of composure, intelligence, and strategic mastery. The CEO's methodical approach, blending patience with psychological insight, left an indelible impression on everyone present. The reactions of the flight attendants added another layer of complexity to the scene. Trained to remain neutral and professional, they could not help but acknowledge the precision and effectiveness of the CEO's response. Their movements, gestures, and expressions subtly reinforced the resolution without overtly favoring either party. The cabin staff's awareness of the social dynamics at play ensured that order was maintained, while simultaneously amplifying the psychological impact on the passenger who had been displaced. The interplay between authority, observation, and restraint became an integral part of the narrative, shaping the experience for all aboard. The white passenger, still seated, began to internalize the lesson in subtle but undeniable ways. Confidence, once effortless and casual, gave way to hesitation, self-awareness, and a recognition of the miscalculation that had occurred. Every gesture and expression reflected an internal acknowledgement of the authority displayed. The initial obliviousness had been replaced by a dawning comprehension. Entitlement alone could not override experience, composure, and strategic thinking. The passenger's posture softened, movements became more restrained, and there was a perceptible tension in the way belongings were handled. Each subtle adjustment communicated awareness, reflection, and, in its own way, respect for the precision of the response. Observing the surrounding passengers revealed another layer of consequence. Some nodded imperceptibly, a quiet acknowledgement of the fairness and intelligence of the CEO's actions. Others exchanged subtle looks, silently processing the unfolding narrative and recognizing the broader implications. The incident had become a lesson not only in etiquette but also in strategy, perception, and the effective application of influence. The cabin, once a neutral space of travel, had transformed into a microcosm of social dynamics, power, and accountability, demonstrating that careful planning and measured action can shift even the most tense and uncertain situations. The CEO, fully aware of the responses, maintained a posture of composed authority. Every movement was deliberate, every expression controlled, reinforcing the quiet dominance that had been established. The reclamation of the seat was complete, but its significance extended far beyond mere physical space. It was a symbolic assertion of boundaries, recognition, and earned respect. The passenger, now cognizant of the shift, could not ignore the social and psychological consequences of previous actions. The silent observation by fellow travelers heightened the impact, creating a shared acknowledgement of fairness and mastery. The cabin itself seemed to reflect the change in energy. Conversations that had paused resumed quietly, tempered by the awareness of the social demonstration that had just occurred. The hum of the engines and the soft movements of attendants continued, yet there was a subtle reverberation in the atmosphere, a lingering sense of resolution that went beyond simple compliance. Every observer, consciously or unconsciously, registered the authority, composure, and strategic insight that had transformed a moment of conflict into an enduring lesson. Even in the absence of direct confrontation, the CEO's approach communicated volumes. The combination of patience, psychological acuity, and precise execution ensured that the outcome was not only effective, but also undeniable. The subtle orchestration of verbal cues, physical presence, and social awareness had created an environment in which the transgressor's initial audacity was rendered powerless. The effectiveness of the response was amplified by its elegance. The absence of anger or impulsive aggression made the assertion of authority all the more powerful. The passengers' collective awareness contributed to the lasting effect. Each subtle glance, nod, and shift in posture served as reinforcement of the CEO's demonstration of control. The dynamics of social observation and perception amplified the impact of the response, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the immediate interaction. Fellow travelers internalized a lesson in composure, strategic thinking, and the subtle application of influence. The incident demonstrated that authority and respect can be asserted decisively without chaos or overt conflict, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. The white passenger, now subdued by the precision and clarity of the response, faced the situation with a newfound humility. Every previous assumption of casual entitlement had been challenged, and the subtle social and psychological consequences of prior behavior were now undeniable. The reclamation of the seat was not merely a personal victory. It was a carefully executed demonstration of intellect, patience, and authority that left a lasting mark on everyone within the cabin. The subtle interplay of observation, strategy, and timing had ensured that the lesson would not soon be forgotten. Throughout the remainder of the flight, the cabin atmosphere remained subtly altered. A quiet respect permeated the space, an acknowledgement of what had transpired without the need for overt discussion. The CEO's composure, strategic execution, and unwavering attention to detail had transformed a moment of potential humiliation into a display of mastery and influence. Passengers, attendants, and even the displaced individual carried the weight of the lesson, a shared awareness of the power of thoughtful, calculated action and the enduring impact of authority exercised with precision.